Fox News alert: Today Show anchor Matt Lauer fired from NBC News after a complaint about inappropriate sexual behavior in the workplace. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith, and here today, Harris Faulkner. Co-host of After the Bell on Fox Business, Melissa Francis. The editor of townhall.com, Katie Pavlich. And today's #OneLuckyGuy, Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. And he is outnumbered, if you couldn't tell from the laugh during the tease, who is sitting to our left. It's good to see you, Judge.
Pleasure to be here, no matter how grave the stories are that we are to discuss.
All right, well, let's get started with this one. Longtime Today Show anchor Matt Lauer fired from NBC News. It happened after someone filed a complaint against him about inappropriate sexual behavior. NBC News chairman Andy Lack saying in an email to employees this morning, while it is the first complaint about his behavior in the over 20 years he's been at NBC News, we were also presented with reason to believe this may not have been an isolated incident. Lack's email says he received the complaint Monday night. Today, co-anchors Savannah Guthrie and Hoda Kotb made the announcement this morning.
For the moment, all we can say is that we are heartbroken. I'm heartbroken for Matt. He is my dear, dear friend and my partner, and he is beloved by many, many people here. And I'm heartbroken for the brave colleague who came forward to tell her story, and any other women who have their own stories to tell.
Rick Leventhal is live from New York City. Rick?
And Sandra, just 8 days after CBS gave morning anchor Charlie Rose the boot over alleged inappropriate behavior, NBC axes Matt Lauer because of charges that were apparently too serious to be handled any other way. The New York Post is reporting that an NBC staffer complained to HR on Monday that Lauer had sexually assaulted her at the Sochi Winter Olympics in 2014. The New York Times is reporting that it met with that woman on Monday, but she wasn't ready to go public, and that she and her lawyer met with HR and NBC's legal department for several hours on Monday night. The statement released by NBC News chairman Andy Lack this morning reads in part, on Monday night, we received a detailed complaint from a colleague about inappropriate sexual behavior in the workplace by Matt Lauer. It represented, after a serious review, a clear violation of our company's standards. As a result, we've decided to terminate his employment. Lauer replaced Brian Gumbel as co-anchor of the Today Show back in January of 1997 and has circled the world 10 times since, interviewing 3 sitting presidents, covering 20 Thanksgiving Day parades and 7 Olympics, including Sochi, where this alleged assault took place. His co-host seemed stunned by the news this morning.
It's hard to reconcile what we are hearing with the man who we know, who walks in this building every single day. We were both woken up with the news kind of pre-dawn, and we're trying to process it and trying to make sense of it, and it'll take some time for that.
We're learning that a number of news outlets, including the New York Times and Variety, say they've been working on stories for weeks or months about Lauer and alleged sexual misconduct. Variety says that it spoke to multiple women with far-ranging accusations and that NBC was aware of it. Back to you guys.
And potentially got ahead of it. Rick Leventhal, thank you. With us hearing directly from the network themselves with that memo from Andy Lack this morning.
Right. So this NBC is not the government, so there's no due process like there would be if you were going to be tried. But they do have to be basically fair to the accused because the contract that he signed with them requires that. Can they be fair in 36 or 48 hours? Yes, if they analyzed carefully the complaints and decided they were credible and presented these complaints to him and his lawyers and heard their version of them. So this is not a trial. This is not a face-to-face confrontation. This is the satisfaction of management that it's doing the right thing and the lawful thing. And they did that apparently, though these rumors have been around. According to Rick Leventhal's report, they did this in less than 48 hours, which is really record time.
It's not rumors, though. It's not rumors. I mean, what Rick said that is accurate is that reporters have been circling Matt Lauer for a while, and that is true. That's a fact. So for NBC to act like this was all a big shock, 48 hours ago or 24 hours ago is disingenuous. At the same time, I give them credit. Just because reporters are circling someone doesn't mean they're guilty. So it is up to that organization to do a thorough investigation. But to act like this is the first we've heard of it and we instantly fired him, A, that wouldn't be right, because they do deserve time to go and look into it, but B, is disingenuous.
Sounds like this is the first formal complaint. It sounds like the complainant.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't even go that far.
Well,
because NBC is already saying that
what
there may be more.
just said. The complainant showed up with her lawyer, which is very, very serious.
Well, because news reporters had already reached out to her. I mean, she probably should have some representation if she's going on the record and she knows she's being sought after, not just for comment, but potentially to compare stories, which could become evidence in a case. We don't know what's coming down the pike. NBC did not say, no, there's no more. And remember, with Al Franken and the Senate, when he was asked, could there be more women who'll come forth who'll say you've groped them? I don't know. I couldn't have guessed about these two before.
Because there could be civil litigation or criminal prosecution that could follow up.
Some of those conversations that she would have either with reporters or with management can become evidence in those cases.
Well, the idea that, well, this is the first formal complaint, I don't buy that as anything that means or carries any kind of weight. This maybe has been going on for a long time. Maybe there were young women working at NBC who didn't want to come forward and didn't file formal complaints because they didn't feel like the HR department was on their side. They didn't feel like anything was going to be done. And they felt like Matt Lauer would ruin their career, not only at NBC, but at any other network in town. And so this idea that there's only one formal complaint and therefore that's what we're going on, sure, but there may have been other instances that weren't necessarily reported through what they claim are proper channels, and that doesn't mean there wasn't more wrongdoing.
But under the law, if the one formal complaint embodies facts that are severe, that is sufficient to fire him. It does not have to be a pervasive series of regular, consistent, systematic behavior.
But it's a cultural problem, which is what I think we're seeing.
But that cultural problem is where we are now, right? And you wonder if we're at the beginning of this or if we're near the end of this, or look at what Andy Lack said in that memo. This appears to not be an isolated incident. Right. So a lot more could come of just this particular incident.
I agree with what both of you are saying, and I think that language in Lack's email was intended to lift the lid a little bit, to give them some protection, so to speak, because they know a lot more is coming.
But I want to piggyback off of what you said, Melissa, because I think you're right. We can't look at this as NBC acting shocked. You also can't look at it as an accident that happened. You know, I mean, some of what I'm seeing is this sort of, well, the man first and then the woman, and we feel bad about this, and then look. We work at Fox. Let's not ignore the 800-pound gorilla in the room. I mean, we have been down a road ourselves, and what we know as we watch this with these other women, incredible bravery for these victims to come forward.
And can I say, too, I just want to speak to sort of Savannah and Hoda's tears there, because there's also been this rumbling as we see the co-anchors go out bravely in the morning. We saw it on CBS as well, and with a lot of pain come out and talk about someone that they've been close to that's now accused of something that's pretty horrific, and there's a bit of a backlash out there going, what did these women know? And I would just say for myself that I've been close to people who have been accused and shed tears myself, you know, for is it true, is it not? You know, just that whole thing that you go through in your mind, and this is someone I was close to and cared about, and it's hard. And, you know, don't pile on those women who are there, sitting there crying and saying, well, you must have known. I mean, maybe we all hear rumors about lots of things. I mean, and you don't know what to believe and what not to.
Well, and even if they did, what are they supposed to do about it? You know, is it really their fire to be poking around in? I mean, what benefit did they have to be?
Well, to help other women.
NBC has.
Sure, but what you know, does that, based on the culture that they've had and that has been in all of these different stories that we've seen, if those women who work with them every day maybe have heard some things that go on.
Maybe they've had their own experiences.
How are they supposed to handle it? I mean, really, they're going to put their career on the line for something that might not work out for them.
Look,
I mean,
we don't know their total story.
NBC had a choice to make how and when and out of whose mouth to reveal this. They may very well have decided.
Those were his co-anchors.
Right, for PR purposes.
Same with Charlie Rose.
We need the co-anchors to come across this way.
Look,
we know what they really knew. We need them to come across this way at 7 o'clock in the morning, because there are millions of people that are going to be
Gayle King said something I thought that was very eloquent when this happened with Charlie Rose. She said, it's complicated for everybody involved.
Yes.
It's also legal. And so you've got to let those legal channels, I mean, you were just talking about, if there are potentially more with regard to Matt Lauer, you've got to kind of let this play out. So, I mean, we're in kind of, you ask, are we at the beginning, the middle, the end? We're in an interesting zone. They're talking about it on Congress today. They've got bills and legislation trying to hold Congress accountable.
I'm going to guess that Matt Lauer's lawyers agreed that some of these events took place, and that was the reason for the very swift and certain response.
Well, let's not forget that NBC buried the Weinstein story.
Yes.
This is a bigger problem for them than just Matt Lauer and Harvey Weinstein.
And
they were friends, so.
As Mark Thiessen pointed out this morning, it's amazing to see how the private sector handles this, in some cases, so much differently than the public sector.
Well, they don't have that thing called the Constitution hanging out there.
Well, Congress today, you've got Barbara Comstock. She's going to come forth with her anti-sex harassment in Congress bill today. They're going to debate it shortly.
All right. President Trump announcing a new response to North Korea's latest test of an intercontinental ballistic missile. Experts say Kim Jong-un could now potentially hit Washington, D.C. So what's the president's next move? We will debate that. Plus, Democrats responding after Mr. Trump named and shamed Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi for ditching a meeting at the White House.
It would be a waste of everyone's time to continue working with someone who clearly has no interest in coming to an agreement.
Fox News alert. Alarming developments now in the North Korea crisis. After about 2.5 months of relative quiet, that rogue nation launched a new type of ballistic missile that experts say they believe could hit anywhere in the United States. This latest provocation brings a swift reaction from President Trump. Watch.
As you probably have heard, and some of you have reported, a missile was launched a little while ago from North Korea. I will only tell you that we will take care of it. We have General Mattis in the room with us, and we've had a long discussion on it. It is a situation that we will handle.
The president tweeted this morning, quote, just spoke to President Xi Jinping of China concerning the provocative actions of North Korea. Additional major sanctions will be imposed on North Korea today. This situation will be handled, exclamation point. The missile launch, understandably putting the world on edge. The United Nations Security Council will convene an emergency meeting today, later this afternoon, we're told. And Hawaii is gearing up to begin monthly testing of a nuclear warning system beginning this Friday. For the first time since the end of the Cold War. Earlier on America's Newsroom, former Green Beret Commander Michael Waltz said the North's latest launch could be a game change and that the U.S. is running out of time.
The North Koreans have demonstrated now that they have the range to reach anywhere in the United States. If that missile had launched on a different trajectory, it could have reached anywhere on the continental United States. The next step is for them to demonstrate reentry capability, that the warhead could come back into the atmosphere and to miniaturize a nuclear warhead on top of the missile, and they're there. They have the ability to now hit us.
You know, Sandra, from America's Newsroom this morning, we learned a lot from Colonel Waltz, but we're also kind of hearing that there's so much more room diplomatically. Rex Tillerson saying today they tried diplomacy every single day. That's not going to change.
Yeah, and I followed up that discussion with Colonel Waltz asking, I ran past Lindsey Graham's remarks. We're headed to war if things don't change. He jumped in before I could finish the sentence and said, yeah, that's the case.
Well, it's terrifying, and I want to add two components to it. One is a little comforting, and one is on the terrifying side. The little comforting is we certainly have the ability to prevent this from reaching here because of the length of time it would take to get from Pyongyang over to Hawaii or Los Angeles, and we have the ability to shoot it down. And we recently tested that successfully, not against one of theirs, but against one of our own dummies in the Pacific.
Amazing.
Here's the terrifying thing. A very, very well-respected person in the scientific and intelligence community says to me, no way can North Korea develop an ICBM. that means somebody gave it to them.
Yeah, but we're not shocked by that, though, right?
Well, it depends on who that is. Is it somebody we are negotiating?
Yeah.
It's certainly not one of our allies in Western Europe, but is it somebody?
Are you looking at China?
I'm looking at China, or I'm looking at Russia. And the president has relationships with President Xi and with President Putin. Is he having a telephonic relationship with somebody who's helping North Korea threaten the daylights out of it?
The Pakistanis built North Korea's nuclear program. That's something. The Pakistanis built their nuclear program.
But who built this ICBM, which is so advanced, the one they sent off yesterday? It's almost inconceivable that they did it on their own without us knowing about it.
It's so interesting, Katie, because what you're talking about are the markings that we have known for a while that are there from other countries. And we know this around the world, that Russia has had its scientists' hands on other countries' weaponry.
Yeah, a few things. The first thing is that the first priority of the President of the United States, no matter who it is, to protect the country. This is now a viable threat that the President is going to have to ask the question of himself and his administration. Are we willing to live with this threat? And I think that the answer is absolutely not. I was actually just in China talking to Chinese and U.S. officials about the North Korean problem. And it seems like, based on the gap between how China and the U.S. plan to handle North Korea and the fact that China doesn't want to institute more economic sanctions on North Korea because they don't want to deal with the humanitarian fallout of what that would mean from the regime, and they also don't want the regime pointing their missiles at Chinese cities. War might be the only option at this point. It's not a good one, but again, the president has to decide if that threat is something that we are willing to live with.
You and Melissa to talk directly to each other about China, because you guys talk at 37,000 feet. You were recently there, and I know you study the numbers so much on what those sanctions can do.
I think that, I mean, she mentioned the humanitarian crisis, and I don't want people out there to forget what is going on to the North Korean people. I think back to that soldier that was willing to risk his life to cross the border. Shot 5 times, but with a parasite in his intestine the size of a rattlesnake. That is someone who they're feeding and taking care of because he's in the military. That is their best of the best, has that kind of a thing going on inside of his body because of what they're feeding them in North Korea. You hear about people who have escaped, whose families have starved to death. There is a real humanitarian crisis going on in that country where he is murdering and starving his own people. That's an important component of this story that people shouldn't forget.
So what you're saying is humanitarian crisis already existing, piling on, if you will, if China pulls back.
China feels like it's not necessarily their responsibility, that it's a war between North Korea and the United States.
So how do we change their mind?
Making a swift military response very, very complex, which is why, the president's talking to all the right people. General Mattis
you're
understands
sticking your finger in the ocean, right? Because you don't know who they're coupled with. We got to figure out who built that ICBM, so on and so forth.
Xi Jinping today, too.
If they can reach Los Angeles, they can reach Seoul, which is the most densely populated city in the world, and it's just a couple of miles south of the demilitarized zone.
And as Sanders said, he spoke with Xi Jinping today. All right, new fallout after Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi pulled out of that meeting yesterday with the president. They said, no, we're not going. The clock is ticking on a spending bill needed to avoid a government shutdown. The president blasting their move. So how will this all play out?
They decided not to show up. They've been all talk and they've been no action. And now it's even worse. Now it's not even talk.
Speaking of time, look at your watch. The Senate could begin debate just hours from now on the Republicans' tax reform bill. The House is sounding optimistic. Will the GOP holdouts get on board or get in the way?
We still firmly believe that this is the best path forward to help this country's economy continue to grow like we've seen it do since this president was elected.
Fox News alert: President Trump and Democrats are in a war of words as the likelihood of a government shutdown is growing. The president ripping Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi for bailing on what was supposed to be a bipartisan meeting at the White House yesterday to talk about the spending bill and immigration. The president highlighting Schumer and Pelosi's absence with 2 empty chairs.
Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi did not show up for our meeting today. I'm not really that surprised. They want tax increases and we want major tax decreases. So they decided not to show up. They've been all talk and they've been no action. And now it's even worse. Now it's not even talk. So they're not showing up for the meeting.
But Democrats quickly firing back, Pelosi tweeting that President Trump, quote, now knows that his verbal abuse will no longer be tolerated. His empty chair photo op showed he's more interested in stunts than in addressing the needs of the American people. Poor Ryan and McConnell relegated to props. Sad. Everyone loves the sad now. Today, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders slamming the Democrats for canceling the meeting, saying their decision was all about politics.
The president wants to make sure that we do what is necessary to fund defense spending, the military. Democrats are playing political games, and it's really sad what Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi did yesterday, refusing to come and sit down with the president and make sure that we're putting the priorities of Americans first and not the priorities of their party first. This is just a really, I think, disgraceful move by Democrats.
But Democratic Congresswoman Linda Sanchez says it's the president who is standing in the way of better relations between the parties.
Our president is a bully. He loves to demean other people, verbally abuse them, and then he's surprised that people don't want to sit down and have a civilized conversation with him.
I think they are all full of it on both sides. Judge?
I do think that the president won the photo op, though. Those two empty chairs, so that the image of that is profound, combined with a great one-liner, I know you'll like this, Katie, from Mitch McConnell. There's only one guy on the planet who gets to sign legislation and the law. When he calls, wants to talk, we go and talk. Whether you're angry at him at the moment or not.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell made that point. He said, look, I would have never imagined under Barack Obama's presidency just not showing up for a meeting. And you look, President Trump took a line out of Clint Eastwood's playbook with the empty chairs, and he was actually going to seat Chuck and Nancy right next to him instead of the Republicans, which I think is probably some progress on bringing the two parties together, right?
Don't you think
the
that
VIP
they are
seats?
Do we know that for
seasoned
sure?
politicians and their skin is thick enough that when he insults them, it doesn't really get to them? Or does it get to them?
I think it's all theater, and the American people know it, and that they're out there working hard during the day while these people are doing theater. And that's annoying.
That
what do you
we
think,
know
Sandra?
for sure.
Oh, well, it just goes back to that distrust of Washington and government, and American people are fed up. I mean, you guys talk to people every day, and it's like, what is going on in Washington?
Well,
this blame game yesterday
picture,
was crazy.
Big picture, the reason we have this is because there hasn't been a budget in how many years?
8 years.
Every
7
6
years?
months we have a continuing resolution. They do it the last minute. No business, no bank, no state could operate this way.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. What do you think, Harris?
Well, you know, I mean, look, it's a lot of pomp and circumstance. At the end of the day, they are going to have to negotiate to keep the government from shutting down.
Right.
I mean, roll my eyes, side eye till I fall asleep on that. They got to get it done. So the question is, do Democrats, do themselves a favor by saying, and some are arguing, they're going to put their own bill together. They're going to put it in front of the president, and he'll be forced to sign it because they'll probably wait until, December 29th, the last hour of the day, whatever. Or can they all take the high road and get together in one room? They all have to come up with it in a bipartisan manner, though. Otherwise, the government shuts down.
The left's staunch opposition to President Trump from the beginning with the resistance movement, I think, has backfired on them substantially. Because if you look at Trump's record, not as president, but as a person involved in politics through donations or just through commentary, he's not a hard right-wing, social conservative, Republican. He is actually more of a centrist when you look at his overall full record. He used to be a Democrat. And yet their automatic resistance to him has actually not allowed them to move any of their agenda items forward because they started it from the beginning.
Why is it then after Chuck and Nancy, I feel like we can call them that, we know them so well now. No, after our elected leaders, those two, they kind of got what they wanted from the president the last time they sit down. Why wouldn't you go back for another bite at the apple and put some caramel on it?
Well, right,
I don't know.
That's the thing, right? And the question now is if the government does shut down, which, by the way, is not as scary as people think it is. Essential employees will still be going to work, which is actually surprisingly not a lot of the federal government. They will not be going to work if the government shuts down. Essential services will still be there. Who will get blamed? President Trump is going to get his first test on who gets blamed for the government shutdown. But the continuing
resolution requires at least 60 votes in the Senate.
Right.
So he knows he has to work with the Democrats.
It's got to be bipartisan.
I'm trying to picture that. You actually do that sometimes. The roll my eyes, side eye till I fall asleep on that.
No, actually, I'm just falling falling asleep. No, you do. I have kids.
A good visual. All right. Senate Republicans could bring their tax bill to the floor for a vote as soon as today. Meantime, we await President Trump's departure to Missouri, where he's expected to try and get vulnerable Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill on board with the tax bill. She's up for re-election next year in a state the president won. Republicans are breathing a sigh of relief after the bill cleared a hurdle yesterday, passing the Budget Committee. Republican committee members Steve Daines and Ron Johnson had threatened to block the bill, saying it didn't do enough to help small business. But Senator Johnson says he came around after the president gave him assurances.
When the President of the United States tells you he's going to fix your problem, he asks for your vote, I was more than willing to give it to him.
And more encouraging words from the Senate Finance Committee member, John Thune.
It's been kind of a bumpy ride, but we have till the end of the week, till Friday, to stick the landing, and I think we will. I think we're getting close. I think that our members who had concerns, we're doing our best to address those and resolve those. The President, I thought, was very good yesterday in terms of sounding upbeat and encouraging members to get to yes and to work out whatever issues remain.
Lots of visuals today till we stick the landing.
Yeah.
So will they, Judge?
I think they do have the votes. I'm not in favor of this. I'm in favor of serious cutting of rates for everybody like Reagan and JFK did. But in terms of allowing the president to deliver on his promise, I think he does have the votes. Now, is John McCain going to vote no at 2:30 in the morning again, and then some sort of a dramatic gesture?
Katie, I bet. Katie
Somebody
Pavlich.
else going to come along with him, and is the vice president going to break a tie?
People of Arizona want John McCain voting yes. So we should think about that, and he should think of that as well. But you were asking yesterday, Sandra, if Republicans are excited about this plan. Yesterday, they were still kind of working on what was going on. Today, there seems to be a lot more excitement about how things are going moving forward. You say tax cuts across the board. We have the Tax Policy Center, Tax Foundation, and Cato Institute all saying that this bill actually cuts taxes for the middle class across the board at a substantial, significant rate. And so those are the numbers that are going off today.
The excitement in the Republican Party is
that's what Reagan
but they've sold this plan as a tax cut for the middle class, which is interesting why Democrats
But the excitement that I perceive in the Republican Party is in the elites and in elected officials. It's not in the base. This is not the type of sweeping cut that Donald Trump himself campaigned on and would have preferred.
Is that also, though, the fault of Republicans for not selling the plan? I mean, I'm just asking. I don't know. Have they sold enough of what's going to go on, or have they?
It's the fault of congressional Republicans for not giving him a bold plan.
Yes.
If they had cut all rates like JFK and Reagan, and they had the votes, he'd sign it.
Ask one of these Republicans what they expect us to do to growth, right? They used to say we're talking about 4+%, 7% originally when the president was campaigning on tax cuts. Then it got lowered to 3.5%. Then it got lowered to 3%. We're going to go back to normal with these tax cuts.
It's regressive in the Northeast.
But this is because they are hobbled by the rules they've created. I mean, this is that stupid thing where they always say, "Oh, well, we want to, but we can't because the rules dictate this," and you go, wait a second.
You wrote
guys
the
are the
rules.
ones that write the rules. You unwrite them when you want to, and then you talk about procedure and this and that, why they can't. No, it's not as bold as we hoped. It's not that postcard. It's not the simple thing. It is better than nothing, and you have to hope, this is my personal hope, because I very much believe that lower taxes lead to more growth.
But better than nothing isn't generational tax.
No, it's not.
It's
But wait, let me finish. I hope that when this happens and you see the growth, that they can then double down and do the next cut as well.
Next year.
I believe that, and I want to hold them to that. When you see good results, you come back and do more.
They'll have to retain bicameral leadership, majority in that. And so then the question is, does this actually help them in 2018? If it does, they can do that. If it doesn't, they won't be in the majority.
Sobering numbers from David Stockman, who was President Reagan's director of OMB. At this rate, by the end of a second Donald Trump term, $30 trillion in debt. $1.5 trillion a year in interest.
It doesn't sound like the Conservative Party.
No, because they're not cutting spending.
That is more than 50 cents. That is more than 50 cents, and every dollar collected by the IRS goes to paying interest.
Well, how do Republicans rebut that?
Spending cuts are something that they have not been talking about.
Correct.
Well, they got to touch those entitlements.
They used to talk about
rail that nobody wants to.
One thing with this bill too.
You know who is excited about this? Is stock market. See the little thing down there? It's up 61 points, a new record for American stock market.
But those aren't the middle class people that the judge was talking about.
All right, growing pressure on Democrats in Congress to do something as more and more accusers come forward against Congressman John Conyers, and now a Democratic congresswoman leaving early from a meeting of Democrats over their handling of this scandal.
Handle your scandal.
I think Democratic leadership has shown very clearly where they are on this issue, who they're standing with. I think they don't speak for me clearly.
Fox News Alert calls for Democratic Congressman John Conyers to resign, growing louder after another of the veteran lawmaker's former staffers accused him of making unwanted sexual advances years ago. And there are reports Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, along with members of the Congressional Black Caucus, are pressuring Conyers to step down. In fact, they're in a meeting right now. I just caught that on our urgent queue, and the AP is reporting it. Conyers missed House votes Tuesday night and was photographed by a passenger boarding a flight to Detroit from Washington. Here's one of his fellow Democratic colleagues.
We do need someone to fact check everything and make a decision on whether these allegations are true, because if they are true, they are disturbing. But somebody has to make that assessment, and that's not me.
Meanwhile, House Speaker Paul Ryan suggested Conyers should consider resigning.
I know what I would do if this happened to me. I will leave it up to him to decide what he wants to do. I think he made the right decision in stepping down from his leadership position.
Today, the House is scheduled to vote on a bill co-sponsored by Republican Barbara Comstock and Democrat Jackie Speer. The bill would require mandatory sexual harassment training for all members and staffers, including the men, which some women on the Hill have complained that they were the focus of anti-harassment training before and not enough of the men. So you've got that going on. Judge, your thoughts?
I'll tell you what we've not heard are denials from him. And in the absence of denials, in the absence of challenging or contesting the allegations appear more and more credible, and appears more and more likely that he's unworthy of holding a position of trust under the federal government.
Well, compliance, Katie, has already said that they had received complaints about him. And then you've got the money trail, the $27,000 that came from a pot of money that Conyers had access to, not actually from the chain that had been created surreptitiously in Congress, surreptitious to us, the voters.
That's the big question. If this is really about changing the culture on Capitol Hill, they're going to have to go through every single budget and look at where the money is going and implement new rules about how money in a office budget can be spent. That's just the truth. And look, sexual harassment training is great. You can't blame people for not knowing the rules, right? You can't accuse them of breaking rules they don't know. But it seems like a Band-Aid on a problem that really needs a cast. I mean, it just seems
Well, you're giving
ridiculous.
Anti-harassment training to potential victims of the actual
They know
situation.
it's wrong already. They know the rules already. They write sexual harassment laws.
Right.
You think training is
Any
going to
members
make
of
any
Congress are
difference?
attorneys.
You're
Good
right.
point.
When they know.
When they sit there and they talk about training, it makes me want to vomit.
I know.
I mean, what a joke.
Seriously.
What a joke.
I
How
totally
could they
agree.
act like they don't know the rules? They don't know what harassment
They
is.
believe
So is
they're
it a
above
start,
the
though?
We're
rules.
Is it a
trusting them to
start?
write.
No.
We
have
have
to do something for the
Comstock
sake
and
of doing
Speer
something.
at least come forth with something.
This is why I don't like big government, because you are ceding more decisions about everything, about your family, about your health care, about your kids' education, over to these idiots who claim that they need sexual harassment training. These are the people who are going to decide what should be in my child's classroom.
Yeah.
They should decide. They're spending my tax dollars.
I want to get to this from Kathleen Rice, a representative who walked out of a caucus meeting a little while ago. She said that she walked out because Nancy Pelosi and others were not taking this seriously enough for her. Let's watch.
She spoke very briefly about things that female Democratic members are doing, which I think are all great efforts. But let's talk about the big elephant in the room. And that's why I was done with the meeting. I don't have time for conversations that are not real. And I, for one, am not going to stand silent, even in the face of pressure from leadership not to.
She is a former prosecutor. She's a strong-willed woman who stands on principle, and I commend her for taking that position.
And she said something I think a lot of us think when we've been covering all of this, and let's have a real conversation.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, she's telling us there that they were not having one.
I'm so tired of that, though. Conversations about what? About not sexually harassing your subordinates?
No,
on
about
Capitol
not
Hill?
making the victims sign non-disclosure agreements and putting them in a gag order situation so that they can't come forward.
Because
I mean,
to-
I'm all for talking about that.
To what Melissa said earlier, with which, of course, I profoundly agree, the dangers of big government.
Right.
For too long, the culture in Washington has been, we will write laws for everybody else, but
We know
not
best.
for us.
Yeah,
Correct.
and we know best.
Correct. The Constitution says no money shall be spent but what is publicly recorded in a journal. And now we find out about these secret funds.
Exactly.
That's a profound violation of their oath to uphold the
It's
Constitution.
going to take a lot more than just sexual harassment training. They have to change the culture in the sense of maybe don't go out and drink too much after work with your colleagues on Capitol Hill. I mean, there's a whole culture
That can be
goes
included
on
in
Washington,
sexual harassment
D.C.
training. That's part of it.
But I doubt that they're going to talk about that. That's a cultural change
That's
that they're
part
not
of the
willing to
training
make.
that some of us have seen anyway in our careers.
No more Christmas parties.
Screwed.
Cleared of murder by a federal jury. Was justice served? I am so glad the judge is here. We'll debate it.
You don't bring a terrorist and waste taxpayer money and give him a criminal trial. You put him in Gitmo, or you interrogate him and then you execute him. That's how you deal with terrorists.